The message arrived across every human system at the same moment, and it carried no introduction and no warning. Only a calm, steady voice that spoke with complete certainty and told humanity that they had 20 cycles to surrender their colonies, their fleets, and their authority, and that after this time their worlds would be absorbed into Dominion control. Their military would be dissolved, and their people would continue under new rule, and the voice made it clear that this was not a negotiation but a fixed outcome that would proceed on schedule. When the transmission ended, there was no immediate reaction across human space. No panic broadcasts, no visible military mobilization, and no public declaration of resistance. And for many watching from outside, it appeared that humanity had accepted what was coming, because in every previous encounter, the Dominion had always been correct in its assumptions, and no species had ever resisted long enough to matter. At a secure command center hidden beneath layers of reinforced structure on Earth, Admiral Jonas Holley listened to the message without interruption and then asked for confirmation that all systems had received it. And when the answer came back, he simply nodded and instructed his staff to maintain current operations without change. And to anyone unfamiliar with the situation, it seemed like inaction, but for those in the room it was understood that the response had already begun years before. Nearly a decade earlier, human deep reconnaissance units had detected unusual patterns at the edge of known space, movements that did not match natural phenomena or known traffic routes. And over time, those patterns resolved into something far more concerning, a coordinated presence that was not revealing itself but was clearly observing, and from that moment humanity chose not to announce the discovery, but to study it in silence, mapping small details, building slow understanding, and preparing without drawing attention. This preparation did not focus on building a larger fleet or stronger weapons, because the data suggested that such efforts would not be enough. Instead, the focus shifted toward learning how the Dominion expanded, how it managed its forces, and how it maintained control across vast distances. And over years of observation, a clear structure began to emerge, one that relied heavily on stable supply lines, predictable command signals, and a central authority that coordinated every major decision. When the Dominion fleet finally crossed into human territory, they expected to encounter resistance that would either collapse quickly or gather into a single defensive position. But what they found instead was empty space and silent systems. And interpreting this as hesitation, they advanced deeper, unaware that every movement was being tracked and recorded with precise attention. The first disruptions were subtle as supply vessels failed to reach their destinations and communication relays began to experience delays that could not be easily explained. And although these issues were noted, they were not immediately treated as critical because the Dominion had never faced an opponent that targeted its infrastructure in this manner. But as the pattern continued, the gaps grew wider and the response time of their fleets began to slow. On the colony world of Ardent Vale, the Dominion forces initiated a standard ground operation, expecting minimal resistance. And upon landing, they found the settlements intact but strangely quiet, with no visible civilians and no signs of evacuation. And as their units moved through the streets, their scans confirmed that the population was still present inside the structures, not fleeing, but waiting. And within minutes, the environment changed as coordinated systems activated across the city, blocking routes, isolating units, and forcing the invading forces into controlled zones where every movement could be anticipated. The people of the colony were not acting as an untrained population, but as a coordinated network that had rehearsed these scenarios over time. And while they lacked the strength of a formal army, they compensated with precision and preparation, slowing the Dominion advance and increasing its cost far beyond expectation. And although the Dominion eventually secured limited areas, the effort required to do so disrupted their broader campaign timeline. In space, the situation continued to shift as small human strike groups appeared at the edges of Dominion formations, targeting vulnerable assets and withdrawing before a direct engagement could occur. And this pattern repeated across multiple regions, creating a situation where the Dominion forces were no longer advancing with certainty, but reacting to constant disruption. And reports began to reach their command structure describing an opponent that was not attempting to win through force, but through control of pace and pressure. At the center of human strategy, a final phase had been prepared based on years of gathered intelligence regarding the Dominion's leadership, and it had been determined that while their military strength was vast, it remained dependent on a single central authority whose presence maintained order and direction. And with this understanding, a small operation was initiated that focused not on fleets or territory, but on access. A specialized team was deployed through a route that had been identified as overlooked due to its perceived impracticality. And moving carefully across monitored space, they reached the Dominion capital without triggering detection. And once on the surface, they followed a path that had been studied in detail, adjusting only when necessary and maintaining the discipline required for a mission where exposure would mean failure. Inside, the central complex resistance was limited not because it was weak, but because it was not expecting an intrusion at that scale. And by the time the situation was recognized, the team had already reached its objective, securing the Dominion sovereign without prolonged conflict and transmitting confirmation back to human command. The effect of this action was immediate and far-reaching as Dominion fleets across multiple sectors paused awaiting direction that did not arrive in the expected form, and within a short period withdrawal signals replaced advance orders. Not out of fear, but out of uncertainty, and negotiations followed soon after, framed in a language that acknowledged a reality that had not existed before. Humanity accepted the talks, but did not alter its position, and the outcome that followed did not resemble previous Dominion expansions because it was not defined by conquest, but by limitation. And in the years that came after, other species observed a change not in power alone, but in perception, recognizing that humanity had not relied on strength in the traditional sense, but on patience, preparation, and a willingness to act with precision when the moment required it.